It's water white in it or something. What happened in
We don't
Toronto?
have milk.
Toronto was fabulous.
Okay, that's good.
So they showed a project called I'm For You Can Enjoy, which is a series of portraits and interviews of black queer sex workers from the Northwest. Actually, one of the quick interviews from a series less than a second. It can't take long, but you can get a sense of what it's about.
Can you make it full screen?
I've been singing for a couple of years.
See?
He used to sort of invite me around and spank me.
This milk?
Yeah, that's great. No, does it look like it's all right? First of all, it's skim milk. No, forget it. It's not,
No.
That's not milk. That's paint. It's water white in it or something. What happened in
We don't
Toronto?
have milk.
Toronto was fabulous.
Okay, that's good.
So they showed a project called I'm For You Can Enjoy, which is a series of portraits and interviews of black queer sex workers from the Northwest. Actually, one of the quick interviews from a series less than a second. It can't take long, but you can get a sense of what it's about.
Can you make it full screen?
I've been singing for a couple of years.
See?
He used to sort of invite me around and spank me. And it would kind of be like a sort of school teacher pupil kind of thing, and he'd just be like, yeah, so are you ashamed of all the other boys in the class watching? There was obviously no one there. Just be like, yes, sir.
Child is being beaten.
So, yeah, I'm going to punish your black ass. Like, how does it feel to get your ass beaten by your white master? Sometimes like call me a nigger and stuff, and like I just kind of run with it. And he'd do it in a certain voice, and then when we stopped, he changed his normal voice, which is like much higher and like different tone, and it was just kind of like, okay, we can establish that that's just role play, and that's not necessarily who you are. So I can indulge you, but at the same time, I was kind of like, call me a nigger again, motherfuckers.
I mean, that's one of the interviews out of 8 interviews.
Is that your little laugh in the background?
It's Khalil's laugh.
Oh, it is laugh. Okay.
Yeah,
That's very similar.
and then they showed 4 works in progress from a project I'm doing called Fears Toronto, which is a series of portraits of black LGBTQ artists, activists, and cultural producers. And then I'm back in Toronto in June to shoot the body of work itself. And
And then you're moving to Toronto.
yes, I'm in Toronto.
Are you moving to Toronto?
Not yet. And the panel then I was on was around kind of it was around masculinity, respect to politics, and that kind of stuff. It was interesting. It was interesting.
Okay, that.
It was interesting. So basically,
Okay, that means
It
it
was
wasn't.
cute.
That means it wasn't interesting.
well, it was kind of like a very kind of mixed bag of black men speaking, including kind of a trans guy as well that was speaking. So then my thing was around kind of, I don't need to kind of run towards the disgusted basically, instead of kind of dealing with respectable politics. I want to clean and tidy. It's about certain kind of values, but that can only get you so far. And then basically
It won't get you to the gutter. That's always a problem.
it won't.
Yeah.
And then basically, just because you have those politics, even doesn't mean that you would achieve social justice. So you have to kind of see it in terms of its limits. So then my thing was we need to kind of run back to embracing kind of queer, the fact, the city, the sex worker. That's where we need to kind of head back to that kind of a moment that had some kind of energy and a different kind of politic. And because I think that lots of kind of LGBT politics is sanitized, it's clean. And
Almost all of it.
yes,
Yeah, I
yes,
agree.
Yeah. So hence,
So the question I have,
yeah.
dipping nicely into our seminar today, is did you think this, or does this in any way connect with Foucault and what we're reading with Courage of Truth? Because you just presented several different versions of truth, one of them being, let's say 2 different versions at the moment, the clean version and the dirty version.
Yeah.
And so which is the true truth? Or is that just such a wrong way to ask that question?
I think strongly to ask the question for some reason.
I mean, we're sitting here talking about the truth. We just had an hour conversation about artificial intelligence and what does it mean to talk about learning, any of this kind of stuff. So you've just interviewed these people. They're talking about they're doing.
Yeah. I think different kinds of truths can coexist, and the question begs what then comes out of those tensions when they kind of throw themselves up. That's what I think.
And just getting a general just getting a general sense of the temperature of the room, as it were. Is there anybody here who agrees with Ajamu or doesn't agree with Ajamu?
I don't agree.
And so, do you think that there is a truth that is, you know, true for all? That's a greater like there's the clean truth we're talking about and the dirty truth.
I don't think that it's a matter of what truth is more true.
Okay, so what did you then want to say?
No, I think it's a matter of creating this kind of encounter with the people that were there with Ajamu, or the people that he interviews. And during that interview, it is a parrhesiastic moment.
And why is that the case?
Because the person who sits in front of the camera and in front of Ajamu, they take a risk, they reveal a part of themselves, and they become an indication of what a true life is.
But
Okay.
but then I think that
It sounded very nice, though. It was very well presented.
Why?
Yeah, go on.
Yes,
Anya?
I mean, I can do another try. It sounded like what you were saying was this kind of situation is not useful for the politics. It can't provide the conditions in which the proper kind of politics can happen. Because once you go...
Yeah, that sounds really convincing.
No. I mean, I had this sort of experience where I was going to a book launch of the memoirs of a transsexual born in, I think, 1940 or something. And it was like compiled by this Forum for Homosexuality in Munich.
Uh-huh.
And a former student of mine had made a video on a quilt piece for this event. And it was really odd because I'd never been at one of their events, and it was extremely middle class and polite. And this woman's life was mainly, and the memoir wasn't really so much about the transitioning, it was really about sex work that she'd done all her life, and these different bars that she had in Hamburg, and kind of different way. And she had died kind of just before it got, like she'd seen the first print of it, but then she died. And they were talking about all these discussions that they had with her about what to leave in and what to leave out, and kind of the book itself. And I was like, well, so what did you leave out? And they said, oh my God, she had just so many stories about sex. You know, and I mean, there were plenty in the book already, but it was kind of indicative. And then also there was loads of stories about tax, apparently, which was really important for her because she had all these businesses and she was making loads of money
about
at a
tax.
certain point.
Yeah, right.
And she really wanted to describe that in a lot of detail. And it kind of just, and the kind of questions, because it was presented like by her, parts of it were read by her niece, and her sister was there also. So there was kind of this odd story where it was really interesting because it was like a childhood in the 40s, but you know, she was still a boy, but she'd already been dressing up as a girl, even going to the post office and things like that. I mean, it was really curious, but then people were kind of making all these comments about her sex work. And you just realized they sort of tidied up her life in a weird way, or that, yeah, it was just,
Which-
and I was kind of
It's
really
very
shocked
important.
because I was like, this is the archive for homosexuality that used to be just for gays and lesbians. It just started to let, or be interested or feel that they have to collect material, like trans stuff, and this was like edited by a woman who wasn't. And I don't know, that shouldn't make a difference, but it was that
So,
thing that you described, so.
so let's just make sure we got everything on the table, because this is how we're gonna enter the Parisiac discussion today. That's that face.
Really?
Yes, so,
I do it all the time.
yes, so the first is, we start, for people who came in late, can you just show the video again, just so, because it's very short. So, Ajama was saying that he's just come back from Toronto, where he was basically a star, and everyone loved him, and therefore, you know, and he loved everyone, and so it was all very good.
And a movie.
Yeah. And anyway, and his work was, you know, regaled.
So yes, so this is one of the videos from the series. The first one again.
I've been singing for a couple of years. And he used to sort of run around and spank me.
No, this is the one.
And it would kind of be like a sort of school teacher pupil kind of thing. And I'd just be like, yeah, you know, so are you ashamed of all the other boys in the class watching? I was obviously no one there, so I think so.
I really like that part, there's no one there.
Punish your black ass, like, as if it was getting ass beaten by your white master. Sometimes like call me a nigga and stuff, and like I just kind of run with it. And he'd do it in a certain voice, and then when we stopped, he changed his normal voice, which is like much higher, like different tone, and it was just kind of like, okay, we can establish that that's just role playing, that's not necessarily who you are, so I can indulge you. But at the same time, I was kind of like, call me a nigga again, motherfuckers.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
The person who hires the sex worker
Yeah.
is a white person or a black person?
Around with kind of race play and a language that's extremely loaded.
You mean the client or the sex worker?
Both of them do.
Both.
Both of them do, yes.
Does
Yeah.
the sex worker require this kind of, let's say, political aspect of the client or not?
Some of the guys I know are very, I'm aware of some of the politics around race and race play, and a few of them I think are not that aware of it, but they're not kind of totally, don't know what's going on either.
Yeah, but I mean, do they require this kind of political view on race play from their clients?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily, no.
So let's just go back to, the reason I wanted people to hear it, just come in, welcome everybody, happy Valentine's Day and all that. I thought you were ill. You're still ill.
Stay away.
Okay. Anyway, so happy Valentine's Day, et cetera, so on. The thing that we're talking about now, we started off with Ajamu's fabulous debut, not the first debut, actually. It's like becoming a virgin over and over and over again. You know, if you go, that's right, all fun. But it brings up this Parisia, and I know I'm mispronouncing it, and I will always mispronounce it, I've decided. I'm going to just mispronounce it, so try not to pronounce it as I'm pronouncing it. Parisia.
Parisia.
Parisia. I find that annoying, but anyway, Parisia. Okay, there you go, Parisia.
Because Parisia sounds more like grounded.
Doesn't it?
Parisia. Whereas Parisia sounds.
Yes, it does.
It's almost like something that is and something that one you aspire to.
Yeah.
Yours you aspire to and yours is.
Boring.
Not boring.
Plotting.
Deadly.
Deadly. Great. Yeah, see, this is the marriage, the death, the grind, it's all there.
Eros as you know.
Anyway,
Okay.
the thing to think about is this question that we're all working on right now, this question around, you know, truth. If we're talking about politics, social agency, any of these kind of things, the element of truth is always there as part of the positioning. So, do we just secretly go back to a metaphysics, so the truth, or not. And if we're not, then this Despina raises the question of the encounter as creating the truth. But you were saying that one of the things that you found annoying about the whole experience was that in the presentations it was quite a clean thing. So all the dirty aspects of, by dirty one means body fluids, shit, racist commenting, all those kind of things that is part of the discourse is, you know, cleaned up. But then I didn't understand what you were clarifying. Can you just say that again?
In the way that cleans up, that gets cleaned up,
Right.
it doesn't actually make a more equal,
Right.
or promising kind of landscape for what you're actually trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually constricts things because
That's
it
right.
excludes certain things. So what I felt was I was going to this presentation, this kind of memoir, and it was the same sort of moment. It's somehow they had to have a polite version of this woman's life history, and the fact that, and it seemed to be sort of somehow incongruous. I mean, she'd written it herself, but the way it been edited or even talked about, I think, more afterwards, the general vibe of the situation made me feel like it was sort of being misplaced in some way.
Yes, yes. The reason
And that was problematic for the politics of, you know.
So we're just trying to get a number of truths, a number of types of truth on the table, as it were. So this is a kind of sideways version of the cleaned up truth. Is that fair enough to say? So there's the cleaned up truth, which is just basically like, say, a logic. So there's no sensuousness to it. And then there's the truth that has sensuousness to it, but it's still overarching. It can be too grand a position. And then there's the truth that is this Parisiac truth. Am I getting there? No.
You want me to say it in Greek? Parisiastiki.
Thank you. This truth, which is something else altogether, but you were saying, or one of you were saying, that those tapes are presenting this form of truth. So I'm wondering aloud, and then what we were talking about earlier was this question of cliche. Like, what's the difference between a cliche and a stereotype and a so-called grain of truth? What's the grain? All of those ways of put stereotype, cliche, grain of truth, all that kind of thing, that is bringing in a metaphysics. It's bringing in a very specific logic to how one understands the truth. On the other hand, if you were forced to end up taking some sort of horrible liberal position where, well, but you say this, I say that, we're all good people, air kisses. Okay, you don't mean that, but if there isn't this overarching truth, then how does one claim what they're doing is anything other than what survives a might versus right thing? So I fight, you fight, and then whoever wins is the version. Now the Marxist argument, of course, is they who have the power are the ones that have won the war. That they can declare what's true and what's not true. But we know that's not the truth. But then what is the truth? And so on and so forth. Without trying to sound really horrible and spiraling out of control with this question, so we're not going to go completely mad. I'm just wondering, because you'll see there's a lot of groups, mainly on the right now, nationalist groups, fascist groups that are using very similar techniques, discursive techniques of how to talk about their real story, what their real scenario is. They have the same heartfelt position, except they're annoyed about something that is despicable and you want to just shoot them. And so the question is, how is this version of the truth more true or more something than some other version? Because we know that if it happens through an encounter, what makes it a grain of truth or a stereotype is that somehow it sticks. And that what makes it unstick is often forging a political struggle which is either very clean or dirty, depending on where, or somewhere in between, where you're trying to implement that struggle. So you're in a theater presenting, where were you presenting this thing?
I'm at the Harbour Centre.
At where?
The Harbour Centre.
Oh, the Harbor Center. Oh, that's nice.
Yes.
Anyway, but, okay, it's a really nice center,
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it looks very she and all the rest of this kind of thing. So it would be very provocative, let's say, to present a fisting festival there.
Yeah.
You know, it just would be, you know, now, that, and it, maybe nobody would go to it that you'd want to challenge. Maybe the only people who would go to the fisting festival would be those that were interested in fisting and they're already sort of converted, as it were. So again, the question becomes, where do we position these things? And particularly in terms of the reading we've been doing with Foucault right now, with The Courage of Truth. Is it, why do you think he called it courage? What was the courage of the truth? So we've got a couple of things on the thing, because maybe it's courageous just to be sterile. Maybe it's courageous to be filthy dirty in a hotel room. I mean, a hotel lobby, not a room. You know, so that's why I'm trying to push this out.
Do you, because you just suggested actions or truth and not just speech. Because he in the French, he says vrai dire.
And thank you so much for the French.
You're welcome, it's really great.
Brilliant.
Even if you don't.
Fantastic.
It's worth listening to, even if you don't speak French. It's so
No, I got
especially
very,
on a bus, because it's like.
I got very moved listening to it, because I mean, I knew him, and we, you know, it's like to hear his voice again. It's like, I really felt like it's, you know, the HMV record or something going on. Yeah, go on.
So he says vrai dire, which is truth. The exact translation would be truth speak. And so, I mean, obviously bodies can speak, but
In fact, that is what he's talking about, that bodies speak,
Yeah.
because he's talking about the cynic.
Yeah.
So,
So it is that, so it's the same, it's not just speech. As I asked the question, I realized I answered it, so.
that's good. Very, very neat,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. Okay, this seems to have closed down the conversation as opposed to.
Well, I was saying, because we talked a little bit about the encounter last week, and I felt like this, your sense of it opened the question for me, rather than, not that I actually agree with you what you said I think it was last week when you said there are certain truths that are
Immutable, yeah.
And I do believe that, but I think there's a whole group of truths that are not as easily immutable, but I guess they're defendable, and that's.
But
what
here
the
I come
encounter
in
comes
with a sciencey kind of headspace now. Or like let's say a math, you know, like doing coding, something like that. That, in a base 10, 1 + 1 is 2. I want to say that is a type of truth, but that's not a truth I'm interested in. That works. And then I think to myself, well, actually I'm interested in that when the 1 + 1 is 2 also initiates sensuousness. And now we're getting into the question of algorithms and how that actually, how an algorithm can initiate or can invoke a form of the body, a form of sense, a form of smell, a form of thinking, a form of any of this, you know, passion. So it seems to me that when you get in an environment that is cleaning itself up, you're going to get further and further and further away from what is actually at issue. But that could just be a position I'm taking. That could be a political, ideological position. Like, I'm just thinking about the conversation we had earlier. If one is thinking about artificial intelligence and this notion of the unfolding of intelligence, so if you're thinking of how an emotion operates, and let's say you're coding this, and Daria, you might have something to say about this as well, but the coding of sensibility, the code becomes something that, an emotion that you go toward, and then you code it into the algorithm, and then the algorithm responds back and creates a bigger version of it, and so on, and it creates this wider sense of what can be considered emotional, as it were. And that's true, but it's mutable. But it's mutable precisely because the algorithm is what's immutable, not the content. So to put it slightly differently, it's the statement that's the immutable aspect. I've thought about this a long time because I don't mean to say, that murder is wrong, and that's immutable, and that's the true, because that we go into the question of ethics, and this is where someone like Kierkegaard does come in with his teleological suspension of the ethical. That needs to be suspended when one's thinking about the immutability, because the immutability is where we go to with Einstein, with the E equals mc squared, with something that creates the cohesion, the so-called encounter. And when that thing gets created, that's immutable. So, and that's why, and anyway, that's the position that Einstein's taking around the speed of light, and why he did not think that two things could happen in different spheres at the same time, because it would have to be faster than the speed of light. And the speed of light was an immutable truth. So I'm okay about talking about immutable truths as long as that's where we're clear that we're talking about in terms of mathematics or that kind of thing. But when we're talking about in terms of right and wrong or emotions, it gets cloudy. And what I love about this work, the Courage of Truth work, is that Foucault is not afraid to be cloudy here. He wants to go to the complicated part, to talk about, well, how do you get passion, anger, integrity into the body from a position of immutability. Not the immutability of taking a position. That's why you were correct, Emily, when you were reading last week about let's say your hesitation about that work.
Kenneth Goldsmith.
Yeah, Kenneth Goldsmith's work
Yeah.
about when he was talking about, standing up for the position, and because it's not the standing up for the position per se. It's the immutability of the statement meaning the algorithm, not the statement meaning this is how I feel. The statement, the immutability of the statement that somehow enables, and that's what I hope we discussed today, this somehow enables this thing that Foucault is willing to call courage, which is not an innocent word. The courage of truth. So, for example, the interviewee that you had, I consider courageous. It's the everyday life of somebody who's a sex worker, dealing with, bullshit and finding it funny and finding it this and finding it that, whatever. So but I find it courageous, but I don't find it sociologically courageous. I find it courageous in this other way, and I don't know if that's just me trying to fit this into Foucault here, or what you were saying, Anya. I like the fact that you changed your title in your thesis from whatever it was to queer feminist. You've added queer feminist in there. And I like the fact that you've added feminist to queer. Now, I wonder if you've done that because there's something that's coming out of that queer feminist link that creates a grain that is, shall we go as far as to say a grain of truth, but anyway, a grain of something. Is that fair? That you want to direct thinking in a certain way?
Yeah, I almost want both of these things to qualify each other. There should be,
I mean, in the olden days, okay, in 2,000 years ago, when we first had feminism, feminism was queer. I mean, there was it was a sexual thing. It wasn't about gender. I mean, it was also about gender. So it's gone through this metamorphosis or this cleaning up move.
Now it's a t-shirt.
Now it's a t-shirt, teacup, lots of things.
Yeah.
It's actually coming back on the agenda. I was actually quite thrilled about this. Anyway, side note. But the queer thing as well started to get cleaned up, whitewashed. And I'm wondering if in sticking those together, you're trying to reclaim something else, and if so, can you speak to what that is?
I mean, I had feminist in the beginning.
Yeah.
got from the position that it included the queer position as well.
Yeah,
And then after a while, I felt like, okay, so now the queer has to come in and be more explicit because, yeah, I kind of, I mean,
yeah,
you pretty much explained it. Yeah, it's kind of trying to bring two things together that are together, should be together, but in discourse and how they've been kind of used or thrown around
and I mean,
have become sort of weirdly
polarized or
polarized,
not the
or
same room.
the one doesn't seem to include the other anymore in the way it should or could.
So those
I
should,
get
so
it.
these words
Yeah.
should, could include, I'm wanting people to think about what you're taking from these kind of words in order so we understand this thing called true, or even accurate. Maybe true is just too romantic at the moment, so we just say accurate. You wanna say something like that, but I use the word grain. There's a bit of a grain there. I was doing that in a sneaky, horrible way, because I really was trying to get people to move into this thing called granularity. So just so you know that this was not, again, a term out of physics, which is an incomplete term, by which is not meant, it's not finished, it will never be finished. The grain is not like the grain of rice or the grain in Roland Barthes' grain of truth, but it's the incomplete marker that forms the attraction or helps form the attraction and names the attraction at the same time. So it's a very odd animal. It's like the God particle. Now, I mention this again, not to get us too off field here, off piste, but because if we're gonna talk about this thing called the truth, and we're not gonna now bring back in metaphysics, we have to be very clear what is going on. And, yeah,
I don't know, is the instinctual in this?
no. And the reason is, maybe yes, shouldn't really say no. I worry about the word instinct because it sounds like a drive, it sounds like something that is propelling someone forward. And it has a depth to it that I think is not, at least in this case, what's being attempted to be played with, that is, say, a surface. And the reason I say that is because I'm thinking more, let's think about the computer screen. Is it possible to get sensuousness into this environment that we're used to now called a computer, or in fact a robot or bot or something? If you rely on this thing called an instinct, it's gonna have soul, it's gonna have a lot of other things that are gonna come into it, and maybe not even a soul, but something that is produced through the generative splitting of biology and so on. Whereas it seems to me that it's perfectly reasonable to think that if a grain or this granularity can exist, then in this algorithmic way, which let's say queer, feminist, or how we're talking about this encounter can establish itself, then the sensuousness is a superficial move. I mean, a surface move. Superficial in that sense. Lauren, you were going to say something.
Oh, well, I suppose just wanted to sort of kind of like, not like when you say surface, it's also kind of like kind of, I like to think of sort of the multi-directional surface in every direction. So it's sort of got an expansiveness to it.
Yes, absolutely.
And so things can work over it in. So it's not like just thinking of one plane, but kind of sort of the planes in all directions have an asymmetry. Capacity is very symmetry.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you for adding that, making sure that when you're thinking of surface, you're not thinking of a plane of immanence. You're thinking of something else that it's more of a singularity than I mean, surface in the most expanding sense of the word in all directions. Which is why the word God particle is so useful. Even though, I mean, because it implies, because when you think about, well, what is something that doesn't exist but exists in all directions, is all knowing, is all this, is all that. Well, the only word I can come up with is God. Except, obviously, we're not talking about God. So we're talking about something, if you think about the Higgs boson. Yes,
I'm
you're making a face.
Well, I was just thinking more like
You and Despina and the faces, I'm telling you.
like it's sort of this contrast between how we speak of this sort of surface versus depth, but not losing something that's a bit like depth with surface or important.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
So, and I suppose because when you talk about like drive or instinct, I think there is sort of aspects where this sort of kind of the surface bit does relate to drive aspects. Things
Mhm.
do work over that, you know. So I wouldn't. So I do relate. Kind of. It depends whether you want to see, like subjectifying drive when you're talking about it, or whether you're thinking about drive in a different sense.
But I said no to start with because I was saying that Catherine was, I mean, I don't want to think on your behalf, but I was thinking that what you were thinking is subjectively in that sense. And therefore, it would bring in a whole array, a whole like Trojan horse filled thing of entities that one wouldn't want to necessarily bring in.
Well, I wasn't thinking, I was thinking bodily, but I wasn't thinking subjectively. And
No, but bodily can be subjective.
Oh, yeah, it can
Yeah,
be.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I was,
Yeah, okay.
you're right, obviously.
That's
No,
right.
I wasn't equating bodily with subjective, I was equating, the way you were talking, I said, the word knowing came to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like knowing that it's,
I think knowing is more helpful than instinct at the moment. Maybe
That's
we
what
could
I meant,
circle,
like
we could maybe circle back to instinct in the end and just end up calling it instinct, but I think it's a form of knowing, but it's a sensuous form of knowing.
And,
Yeah.
and isn't it like also connected to these two different notions of truth, of like in Latin and the Greek, like veritas and aletheia, or whatever it is. That one truth is
Thank
the
God
one
if
that
anybody
we're talking
speaks Latin here.
that,
Where is Mattia?
I know, he's in Milan, he sends us there.
that we have like correct truth, the one that we were talking about, maybe almost like algorithmic truth, that 1 + 1, or mathematical truth, that is correct, but that doesn't require any courage.
Yes,
But the aletheia requires courage because it's uncovering or unforgetting something that's been forgotten or covered because for whatever reason.
but then even the even the uncovering and the revealing and concealing moment still takes in a paradigm that is not the paradigm of encounter.
Okay.
No, you're saying okay because you're saying,
Thinking.
you're thinking, not, not because you're agreeing. Okay. Anybody want to comment on John? Oh, what do you want to say something? Anna, were you going to say something? No, just, great, that's strange. Anna.
I'm slightly lost because if I
just
understood you correctly, when you were talking before about the algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about the fact that the statement, the algorithm, as immutable, that is a form of courage. Did I totally get that?
Well, what I was trying to say, but obviously was not clear enough, was that the immutability of something enables something to take place. Now, the fact that, and that's its whole shtick, that's its whole purpose, it's its whole entity. There's nothing courageous or uncourageous about it. So it forms the is in a really not clean way, but let's say without adjective sort of way. So it quote works, but it works in the sentence of this in the most benign form of objective, although algorithms don't have to be benign. The reason I'm being sort of cautious on how I'm saying that is that to present it then as though it's its own thing, on top of which or inside of which one adds the content or one adds something is then to misunderstand the way in which the immutability is working. So it's not like 1 + 1 stands alone in the wilderness shouting 1 + 1 is 2. Something like that. It's not like we have that situation going on. It doesn't exist without the encounter. It has to have that encounter. So then the question becomes not if a tree falls in the forest, did it fall? Answer, yes. You know, if a tree fell in the forest and no one was there to hear it, did it fall? Yes. Okay, we've gone past 2,000 years of concern. Okay, the question becomes, what is it that makes that matter? What's the matter with it, literally? What's mattering about it? And what's it's mattering is how you then leap into ethics and politics and all sorts of things. Now, it's that inability to rip oneself away from the mutability of the statement, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to ask what's the matter, or what matters in the matter, how does the matter get mattered, get into a material base, is the first 2 or 3 lectures of Foucault trying to outline how this Parisic moment operates. And that's why he's trying to be very, we'll look at the text in a minute, I'll pull it up so we can go through the lines, but I'm just trying to give you a basis here so we can see where we're going with it. He's not suggesting that one learn what's right and wrong, but there is a right and wrong way to learn it, something like that. It's not like there's 22 different ways to, even that's sounding too restricted or too clean. The searing aspect, searing like as in painful, ripping, what I in my work call blood poetic, the blood of it, and I go to blood because of circulation and sentientness. That's why. That is not because I'm trying to go into Aryan race or something. It's like, the fatherland or something. But this way in which it's not the content, but it's the way in which the relationship between the immutability of the statement and that which becomes enabled in that immutability gets disadvantaged or disrobed, or something gets pushed in some other way. This is the basis of the Parisic move. Yes?
Following from that, I
Okay.
would like to say something that I haven't figured out completely yet, but I have been thinking about it since you initiated this discussion, I don't remember when, about rape, for example, that rape is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
As we have been discussing now, what makes this immutable?
Mm-hmm.
So following from what you just said, I have the sense that it's not the ethical dimension of the rape as an idea,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the disruption of the protocols that establish the encounter during the rape, which enables a certain kind of idea of the rape to be created.
Hmm.
So it's the protocols.
But then you could make the argument that honor killing is based on protocol, let's say, called culture, and therefore or genital mutilation.
Yeah, but I'm not talking.
No, but if that were like a protocol, so I'm just pushing you to get to what you're really trying to say, because
it's an architectural problem.
it is, but in saying that it's an architectural problem, I don't see at the moment yet.
But there's also the human aspect in it.
Well, but the point is that rape and we were talking about rape of a 3-year-old, so we were like, so to make it as directly horrible as one could come up with, but rape and genital mutilation, or let's say, well, let's try and find something that, well, yeah, in rape in a culture that, like in our culture now, is acceptable, but it's considered wrong, but it's still secretly acceptable.
Yeah.
Genital mutilation is basically considered completely acceptable in many cultures, including in European cultures, by the way, but they don't often talk about that. But of course now it's being seen to be, and it is horrifically horrible. Now, when does the culture present something that appears to be completely mentally bizarre, like, for example, allowing, in quotes, women to do whatever, to be men, to be free, to drive, whatever. What that can be seen as destroying a protocol, from what you're saying.
Yeah, but I'm not.
And what's the difference? What's the difference then?
I haven't figured it out completely yet, but I'm not talking through an ethical position like that. I don't know, I cannot articulate it.
Can
very
anybody
well.
articulate that? Because this is
Maybe
this
it's
is the
about
crux of it.
blocking the structure of the body without organs, and then
Okay,
it cannot
now
really
you just
circulate.
brought in another concept. You just concept dropped. It's like name dropping.
I'm not doing it for name dropping.
I know you're not.
I'm
So
just trying to
what do you mean
understand.
by body without organ in this? You're right. Okay, you're right. I'm just trying to get you to say it.
Okay. So, you want to elaborate on the body without organs?
Well,
and
you can't just concept drop
Okay, yeah.
without.
So what I'm arguing also in today's lecture and the previous week,
You don't mean here being a lecture. You mean the lecture you're giving tonight.
yeah, and also yeah,
That's what you
yeah.
thought. Today's
No.
lecture.
Today's lecture, my audience. Love you. No. No, what I'm arguing is that the true life that is indicated through the Parisiastic moment is the life of being a surface, of fabricating and finding your body without organs. And this body without organs doesn't mean that it is, a physical body without organs, but actually it is a kind of surface, and it is a surface where the organs are rearranged in a new structure, while the former structure that was already given by the law, the society, the father, I don't know who, is being destroyed. And this body without organs can be, or not can be, is different for everybody, and it includes others as well. It's not something that you do by yourself. And it can only be populated by intensities. So once fabricated, it allows intensities to pass and circulate, and this is totally sexual and sensuous.
Okay, that was fantastic, but sadly you lost people after the concept dropped of bodies without organs. Watching people's faces. So,
No, I think it's actually,
okay, can
That
you
part is
translate?
interesting.
Can you translate what she said?
well, I think I understood it more like how, in relation to my world.
Okay, that's good.
Like,
So
so
let's
because
translate
like
it.
body without organs to me more like speaking about this, actually essence and the ghost, the human ghost in a way. And I think it's just, well, like I just recently looked at this like shamanic rituals and how you become a shaman, and you're going through the process of self-loss, which I kind of connected to a process of like ego death or ego annihilation from transpersonal psychology. And
This is quite the translation.
No, we're just welcome to the next world. You threw us.
no, but to me it's very much similar, that there is like something dead of your ego as you are right now, and then it's total like annihilation of who you were before, and you are going through the process of being not being assigned, but it's just absolutely new type of identity appears within actually your like being still like yourself in your physical body.
Well, when you were doing your brain waves, and so you had your brain waves that were being projected on the walls, right? And then you were also speaking. Can you in any way connect the brainwave conversation that you were having with an audience and what was just said? Can you see how that fit with what Despina has just said? If not, that's okay. We'll just park that.
Well, it can be because it's literally kind of just, as I looked at it as like this negative understanding of Parisia, because I'm not hiding anything. There's like nothing hidden. Literally, I don't even know like what I don't even know myself what's going on there, but I show it to everyone.
Okay, so that's not necessarily a negative version of Parisia. It's not a version of Parisia.
No, I think it was. I connected it as critical when I read it. Like Foucault mentioned that there's like when you're talking, when you're telling like not the truth, but literally everything that's happening with you, like your experience, feelings about everything around. And I kind of called it like negative, not negative, but like in
We're so close to this. I mean, I just feel like. Dario, you're right. You're both right here.
I just said this idea of like when you were talking about body without organs, and then that the body without organs has these intensities that express and can pass through it and be take place, is that the body with organs is not only a human or a sentient being's body with the organs, but these organs are also political and executive organs. And then the body with organs also brings in the something called natural or a major way of doing something, and through discarding the organs or getting lost, there's this minor mode that can come into play, and that the organs kind of reinforce the given, the given political or the given executive or the given sexual situation. The majority, not the majority, how do you call it? The kind of the
majority.
Yeah, majority. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the status quo. Or
yeah.
Okay.
Like reinforcing the status quo.
Okay, that was.
So
that's like
without organs,
yeah.
we have this possibility of minor key that allows for these intensities to surface, to happen on
and
the surface.
And those intensities that surface, is that the Parisiac moment?
No.
Okay.
No.
So close, Dario. Anya, what are you gonna say?
I'm not even.
Okay.
I'm not gonna. I don't think I'm gonna try. But it somehow he talks a lot about the danger of the Parisiac movement, or the danger, the annihilation.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if that was the.
Well, we're going to go to Foucault in a minute because we're like dancing around in the moment, but which is not a bad thing to dance around.
I mean, the only thing that I could say is that it always kind of requires several. Like it's not a truth that I can tell to myself. Also, it has to be something that mobilizes and that is painful in the way that it mobilizes. Like it's painful in the way that it reveals.
Does it have to be painful?
Yes. Because it reveals something that is sclerotic or that people don't want to see, or that has sort of...
I don't think that's what it has to be, naturally be painful. It has to embody a certain kind of risk.
Yeah, but it also, I think it has this moment of, there's always, because you're sort of in this, in a state of
I mean, whenever someone says something that we would consider a pelagic truth, it destroys a certainty that we had that was wrong. So in that sense, it's
Can laughter be destructive?
yeah.
Okay, so the pain can come out in ecstatic ways as well.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it can be, of course, like you
So it
could,
doesn't have to be pain
you
like
could-
ripping and
no,
crying
no,
and
but you
gnashing
could
of teeth.
become accustomed even to enjoying or taking pleasure in this kind of.
Well, I'm not talking about the
undoing, I think.
masochistic pain. I'm not talking about the pain
no,
like
not in a masochistic way, but I think you could acknowledge that it's. It's.
Send the spider to the fly.
Yeah. You could acknowledge that it's necessary in some way.
But
And
what's
that
necessary?
it gets
Pain.
you. Yeah, like
Is the word irritant going to work for pain, or has it got to be pain?
it doesn't have to be pain in the sense of suffering. It just has to hurt a bit. It just
Can
has
we
to
quote
hurt.
that is a great quote for this seminar. That is so perfect.
Okay, you're right.
It
It just has to hurt a bit.
Just a side note that came
But
from.
that's
She's trying to recover herself.
no, but I'm just saying that the important point that I'm trying to make here is that it's something that is spoken to several. It's a risk that is taken in a, you know,
Yeah.
it's not a sect or something like that.
Yes,
It
right.
is the political field, you know.
In its rawest sense.
Yeah, and it's most like not in its kind of necessarily.
So I call on Adam here because I know that Adam, first of all, Adam worked day and night literally on the platform capitalism type of stuff, right? And so here we have a platform capital person sitting here. And can you just tell people what that is? In case- I mean, everyone probably knows, but just to get everybody up to speed.
It's a body of theory around our contemporary late capitalist neoliberal economy increasingly being premised on data as the most significant form of value, and platforms being corporations like as big as Google or Facebook, or smaller examples like Uber or whatever, or Airbnb, but Deliveroo, exactly, where the nothing is made, nothing is certainly nothing is made, but even like a sort of directly contributive service isn't even being offered, and it's more about facilitating exchange between other parties, and that being done in order to acquire that data. And data, because of like the power of big data and how the more you have, the more valuable it becomes. It tends towards monopolizations and cross-subsidizations, and you know, like there used to be the business ethos of like stripping it back to like the core profitable elements of the business in like the 80s and 90s, but something like Google does the opposite of that and operates across like a whole vast range of seemingly very disparate things, but all of them tangentially in some cases, but ultimately almost all of them feed back into acquiring data, which can then be cross-correlated and can further sort of enable other parts of the business.
So, and there's a reason we turned to you, of course, sorry. So does having this way of conceptualizing, or having a reality check on what's happening with the economy and putting it in these terms of platform capitalism, I'm assuming, because I know this, that there's a political, let's say, way to proceed, or there's a way to understand how to either change this or something. Would you agree with that?
I hope so.
Yeah. And would you say that that's what the word social agency is about?
Yes.
Okay, you know you're being trapped like a dirty rat. Okay, no, you're not being trapped.
Yeah.
It's that, yes.
There's something like when you're already coming to capitalism and then in reading the Nestler, and what
Have
happens.
you read Gerald Nessel yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens to Perhesia when, if it's embodying a certain kind of risk, if we look at the derivative condition and say I can repackage Perhesia into the financial product and resell that risk and tell Perhesia without risk?
This is where we were going with this question. So there were two parts to that question, and I don't want to lose anybody in the process of asking this question. The question is, in an environment where one sees really horrible oppression, where we're living through it. Yesterday I had an amazing experience with my MA students. We had a crit, an all-day crits that went from 9 in the morning, 10 in the morning till 7 at night practically. And almost every single person that did that crit that day was from a war-torn environment, had either experienced bombs obliterating bodies, or had been sexually abused in a war, like through the war environment. And every one of them, it was kind of incredible. And it became clear as the day went on that this is what was going on. And yet here they are in an art school at the RCA, trying to, I don't know, deal with this in a thing called the public sphere, which is the political wing, is like the fifth column of the RCA and this kind of thing. Now, what I found interesting, the reason I'm telling you this is that most of them would call themselves, if not Marxist, then something to do with being, radical. Some sort of, there's no term at the moment because Marxism's kind of gone somewhere and there's no term that's replaced it, but whatever that term would be. Now, I think that platform capitalism, for example, is a very robust way, a very important way to start looking at how to call what's going on, and how the social agents, or whatever these people are, exist. But again, that's putting forward a position, and I'm asking, like, the people that were there, or people in this room, or in similar scenarios, what's the value in analyzing this down to its nitty-gritty moment so that we get to this notion of Parisiac as a statement and the risk, and then we know that there's no way to fight. We just come back like plastic with a memory going, okay, well, I'm against racism, sexism, homophobia, and you guys can just go jump in a lake if you don't feel this way. All good, this all good having this discussion, but let's now talk politics, because Foucault is talking politics here. He's not trying to have a kind of interesting intellectual discussion about really what is truth. He is having a political discussion about what is truth, and he's talking about social agency. So the first part of that was to say, is there some form of social agency that we're all invested in right now in this room, that is maybe in the form of artists or whatever happens to be, but is trying to be part of the solution rather than the problem, in that whole way of putting it. Question one. And question two is the question that Darrow raised, beat me to the punch on that one, which is that in platform capital, the thing that's really interesting about that argument, and it's all coming under platform capitalism or the technosphere, you'll hear these words populating now. It erupted out of the Anthropocene, so it has a sort of a cascading legacy to ecology studies and ecosophy, and so it has that sort of wing coming in. But it's arguing about, it sort of takes as, it's not model, but it takes as, let's say visually, the circulation of the internet, the circulation of data, and that circulation is itself fractals. They're coded, they're coded environments. They're, as we use this word to death, algorithmic, but they're slices in that sense. Okay, who's guilty? Hello, it's all right, we're just joking. You know the person?
Yeah.
Is that person gonna come join us?
I'm not sure.
Probably not. You're welcome to, but anyway, so the question is, in the circulation of derivatives, as we're talking about, or blockchain, where the statement of the blockchain is in fact dealing with the so-called risk. And the risk is precisely what Foucault is talking about in this Parisian moment. And in fact, there are a few books that have just come out recently about Foucault being, in fact, a neoliberal because of this kind of positioning, that he's actually advocating a politics that would support the technosphere rather than be fighting the good fight against it. So have we now backed ourselves into yet another corner, kind of Hegelian corner, the Hegelian corner being the corner of idealism. So you have this fantastic tool called dialectic, but when push comes to shove, you end up with the totality, and therefore this sort of regimented sense of what it is to be. You can take this one up. Yeah, that one can go. I think that one can go.
No, that's a camera, but it has.
Oh, I see.
It has
Right.
battery.
Take mine out. Oh, you can take mine out. Anyway, so would a trader be a Parisiac? I mean, would you know, the person that I had that experience with, I mentioned many times now, at MIT, when asked what was the most expensive thing have you bought, his response was the Greek debt, you know, which was like kind of shocking and disgusting. And then he sold it on to somewhere in Latin America for billions. You know.
What's the most expensive thing there?
Pardon me?
I didn't hear the lesson, sorry.
The Greek debt.
He bought the Greek debt.
Who?
This guy, I mean, we were around a table like this, discussing, I don't know how we got on this conversation, but discussing what was the most expensive thing you ever bought in your life. And people were saying, you know, like I was saying, a house, which was pretty expensive from my point of view. But other people were saying like yachts. And then he was like, well, I bought the Greek debt. And the Greek debt was like 75 billion or something. And he sold it on. Now, it was just, I mean, there's a whole group of people that were absolutely ecstatic. That's fantastic. And you made, you know, 5 times that or something, whatever. I'm like, I'm leaving. How could we possibly be having pizza with you? You know, you horrible scum of a person, you know, this kind of thing. Now, I mention this because given what we're saying, and given, you know, this whole positioning, what's the difference? What's the difference between, you know, the nationalism position? Okay, let's forget about the nationalism position because that gets back to the ethics. But this thing about the risk and the algorithms and this kind of thing. Anybody have an answer? No. Okay, well that was stimulating.
Well, I mean, it was like data, you know, itself isn't bad. It's all about one does do things. So it's not like economies of scale. You know, they can be like disastrous, but it's not like kind of like grounded in the certainty of kind of that. It's about, to me, that I was thinking like in kind of impersonal drive, although it's the impersonal aspect which is plays out. But then it's sort of like hearing that and wanting to work with that, lending that in here. Well, this is the sort of taking care side of it. It's not about, so like when it's like the test bit or the risk, it's not about like testing it and then we'll find what's really right and what's really wrong. It's not like regrounding it.
That's good, okay.
So,
yeah.
It's sort of like kind of testing as a way where you kind of like, well, that attunement is a word, you're sort of attuning to a sort of, well, I think this bestowal of event is another way of putting it.
So did anybody get to chapter 4 of the Parisiac?
Yeah.
So can
May I say
people-
something?
Can people just a second, can people turn to chapter 4, page 57? Because the second hour of the February 8th, 1984 lecture, Foucault addresses the problem of the tyrant as Parisiac. And in that, he makes the same claims we're making right now. He puts forward the same argument. And then in the 15th of February, I mean, because I know this is compelling reading, so that what's happening is that you can't wait to get to the next lecture. So you've probably read all of this in a obsessive. Okay, Despina probably has done this.
What?
I was just looking at your notes. No, that was my little joke. If you look at the table of contents, and you look at chapter 5, so lecture 5, or chapter 5, if you look at what's happened, I love this class.
Always someone under the table.
That's right.
It's always in the table.
It's like crawling under the table. I just saw Anya under the table. It's fine. If you look at the one on the first hour of February 15th, he says something about the danger of forgetfulness of self. I'm just going to throw that out on the table. Okay. And just put that in your head somewhere. And also, if you read the rest of that, object of the mission, care of the self, irreducibility of Socratic verediction, emergence of a specifically ethical parousia. Parousia. I'll get it yet. Parousia. If I see it, I better. Parousia, yes, parousia. Yay. Yay. Okay. What were you going to say about... What were you going to say before I...
I would like to say something different. I haven't... surprise, surprise. I haven't really grasped it yet, but I'm going to say it. So I think that what we were discussing before has to do with two different things. One thing is that in parousia we have an indication of a life which is radically other. And the other thing is that it is about structures and how some structures are open or if they create closed systems. And that's it.
Okay. You could say, okay, yes, and the closed system does tend to bring in a fascist scenario.
Yeah.
Or it is a fascist scenario. It will always then create an either-or scenario, a binary move. But it doesn't answer Dario's charge.
But as far as the debt, the Greek debt that you said is concerned, when we live in this society that now we are beyond capitalism and we have banks, buying Greece and whatever,
That was always
whole
capitalism.
countries, you are in this kind of system, and then maybe a parrhesiast in this kind of system would be someone who will indicate that the true life is radically other from this life that we are right now. So, in what?
No, maybe, but that sounds very pious to me. Sounds like another form of religion.
No.
No?
No, it's a rearrangement of the organs.
Ghost.
It's your ghost.
But the ghost,
But
just a minute, I have to
Okay.
say something about the ghost.
Wait, you can't say anything about the ghost.
Okay.
Yes.
But it has to work. It has to be threatening, and it has to hurt, and it has to be. I mean, it's like so many people can go, yeah, we should do this another way. Capitalism is really bad. La 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 la. But it doesn't.
But here, let me
It
put
doesn't take on.
But
a
buying
kind
the
of-
Greek debt, for example, did hurt.
Of course.
It just hurt. It didn't hurt the person who was buying it.
No, I know.
Okay.
No. I'm saying the Parisian. It can't just be about saying, oh yeah, this is really bad. Let's have a different life. It has to be something that shows
Care?
that actually gives the possibility of. It's not just saying something like, this is really bad, and then we all go, yeah, that's really bad. Let's carry on. It has to be presented in a way and arrive at us in a way that it is truly kind of shocking and mobilizing of, you know.
But are you
So-
suggesting, sorry, Dara, go on.
So it is actually the truth that enables something.
Yes.
When we were talking
It
about
sounds
this
like you're saying
enabling.
that the pain enables.
No, I mean, I'm just saying that if someone tells you, I mean, I've heard 1,000 times now how bad the climate situation is and whatever, doesn't.
And whatever.
Exactly. Exactly. That's
We
what I
sounded
mean.
very LA just then.
You know.
Ever,
I'm being
whatever.
flippant, but it's, you know, some things someone says to you and it mobilizes you.
It
Or a
immobilizes.
group of people.
Yeah.
And sometimes something is just said and you know it's right, but there's no traction on it.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't actually, it's not said in a way or. It's
We're
not
being
so-
loud, we're being like loud
Yeah.
children at the party.
Yeah.
It's like hilarious.
But then we were talking about this exactly this sentence, like something that enables something to take place. That would be that parhesia. But at the same time, we were talking about immutability of something.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this parhesia is this immutability that enables something to take place.
Getting
when it's
warmer,
spoke.
but that was what you said much earlier on.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
but,
but you were warmer at that point, so we haven't moved on from that. That is what you said earlier, right?
Yeah.
But what Anya's saying, and welcome. Hi. What Anya's saying, I think, or just to be as provocative as possible, is that you have to have pain, no gain kind of thing. Is that fair?
No. No, it's not Protestant. It's not.
It's
like
not Protestant.
No, it's not Protestant. It's not
Shame.
masochist. It just has to, whatever is so because we're all somehow implicated with it.
Okay.
And we're letting it be that. So,
But I understood you to say that if something's really going to change, it has to hurt, is literally what you said.
because you have to let go of something that you were just rolling along with.
But if
In
you
a
had
way
something
that
that
you
was very
really-
painful,
Yeah.
like you have a painful experience, someone dies, or the rapes we were talking about earlier, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that don't gain from that.
No. I don't mean pain gains you anything. I'm
Okay.
just saying what has to happen is like, I think it's more towards the thing that it has to be it can't be a mathematical truth. It
Okay.
has to be a felt truth. There has to be a sensation around it.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
So- Has to be a what
kind of truth?
A felt,
It's felt since yeah.
not svelte. Felt.
So it's finding the way of saying it to me, for example, that really like cracks something.
Mm-hmm. No. Good up to that point.
Well, I mean,
But
no,
what's
I mean,
the something that is is it cracking the surface? Is it what's it cracking?
there is a kind of, I mean, what Foucault is talking about in the political field, as far as I understand it, is that there are certain things that are destructive
Can you?
or damaging.
Is there somewhere that you're looking that you can tell us? That you
No,
go
I'm
to?
not
Oh, no.
looking. I'm just like so.
But can we go to Foucault and
Yes.
and see? Because I find it helpful.
But I'm not sure which thing to.
I think
Wow.
not all maths is representational though, so we mustn't get
I mean-
too hard on maths. Well,
No.
Yes.
But when he talks in the beginning about, I'm trying to find one of these things where he finds it. He kind of says.
How about if we try to go to 191? I know that you haven't.
Well, he says, like here, that was our classic thing, is page 11, he talks about this, for there to be parrhesia, you recall, I stressed this last year, the subject must be taking some kind of risk in speaking this truth, which he signs as his opinion, his thought, his belief, a risk which concerns his relationship with the person to whom he's speaking. For there to be parrhesia and speaking the truth, One must open up, establish and confront the risk of offending the other person, of irritating him, of making him angry, and provoking him to conduct which may even be extremely violent. This is what I meant by pain. Maybe it's more that the irritation and the anger and the possible.
But again,
You have to get to this.
so what happens if the banker or Marie Antoinette says, let them eat cake? And then there's a revolution, and that has provoked people. Is she being the Parisiac?
Why not?
Well,
What?
no, but she's sort of. I mean, that's another thing. I think there's a. I kind of think if a banker says at a dinner party, I've just bought the death of Greece, or Marie Antoinette say, let them eat cake, there's such a kind of, it's not Parisia, but it also
It is a truth.
creates a kind of flash of something. You know, that is quite painful, but that is sort of in a way a picture or the kind of root of what's actually happened also.
And it
You know, like it's kind of, it's a sort of,
and it lacks precisely this kind of care that Foucault is talking about. Like the
Mhm.
banker or Marie Antoinette, they don't care exactly,
Right.
precisely in saying this truth. They don't care.
Right,
So
okay,
Yeah.
right, good,
Yeah,
okay, good,
that's
so we got that part.
but it provokes anger, I think, because it also has that power.
Yes, and that's true, and so it is in fact a part of the is. So in that sense, it's true, it's just not the Parisiac true. It's not the truth of being the Parisiac. And why do you think it's so important to have that in the mix when we talk about a technological age, for example?
That in the care?
To have what?
Okay, obviously this was a very cryptic sentence. Why is it important to have care or Parisia as part of the story of truth when we're thinking about your brain waves, or we're thinking about, you know, artificial intelligence, or we're thinking about political action and social agency? What is important? What?
Was it because there's a, rightly or wrongly, there seems that, like, at present, there is a general consensus that care is a human quality, and if we're moving beyond human agency in terms of control of the structures and systems under which we live, then there's the risk of losing that. Is that?
And can
Because-
there be care?
because also if there's no care, then what exactly precisely happens, what's happening now is the technosphere. Is without this care, there is an algorithmic truth that doesn't care about the world and just creates the thing that destroys the biosphere or destroys the atmosphere or destroys whatever, because there's precisely no embedded care in the algorithmic truth that is, or algorithmic.
Can there be?
I thought about that like in last week in my delirium.
Wow, I love this group. So while you're having delirium, thinking, okay, is there
Oh, we
Parisia?
should hear in the midst.
And then there is a there might be, but we shouldn't be going back, even if we think about this emotion or care, in the sense of algorithm, we shouldn't be anthropomorphing or anthropomorphizing it. So it's not that algorithm would be kinder to the world because we program it in the way to feel a human emotion, but there should be something in it, in the algorithm, that would correspond to human emotion, but it's going to be algorithmic emotion that doesn't have to have anything with our desire. It can be something else. That
Okay, but no, I'm just gonna stop
Cut.
you there. Yes.
So this is like the Terminator movies.
Thank you, Shannon.
Solved it for you.
But that way of arguing is still understanding, let's say, programming rather than learning. And it throws out all the stuff we've been talking about with Foucault and all the rest of these characters about questions of encounter and so on. If the Parisiac moment, or if the Parisia is a moment, step one, and that moment is always already an encountered moment, then it's not that one programs in care, one programs in encounter. It's a very different thing, and then the encounter is what
enables the care.
so there's something about creating this intensity field that you raised that is absolutely essential for care. No face, two faces,
I
to
have
the
a
same
face
face.
because
I have a face.
because I mean it's still care for. I mean, personally, I feel really confused by truth. I can understand politics as something that I just choose
Yep.
and stick to, and that makes perfect sense to me. What doesn't make sense for me is truth, because truth then, like in this example, for example, with the algorithms, yeah? I mean, why would it be in the algorithm's interest to, I mean, okay, right now they may be sort of a little bit dependent on us for doing the hardware part for them. But, you know, what would be their interest in a world with humans in it? And, I mean, if
But
there's
that's
other,
presenting an algorithm
you know,
as though it had a position.
well, I mean, the thing is, like, who says what things do and don't have that are other than human, that we can't really speak for? So, who says that the world has to be in a way that suits us? You know, if we're really talking about truth,
But maybe
why isn't it the time for the octopus to take over, for example?
Very smart.
It is the time to put octopus.
Yeah.
No, but
No, I mean, I agree with that, but I think
no, a different way of putting this is, isn't it possible to think that this is the time where the human is finally not understood as the only intelligence, and that there was always artificial intelligence, or whatever we're gonna call it, you know, that is to say, intelligence that happens in a field of that which can happen. So when Lauren was talking about the framework, or rather the surface, as not being this plane of immanence, but this kind of globular, dimensional intensity thing, that it seems to me that if you have that as your, we're just gonna say visual paradigm at the moment, just because it's your image of thought, if that's your image of thought, then the way in which intelligences happen require encounter in statements as opposed to programmable statements. Now, that just parking that to one side, it gets back to this question of the Parisiac moment, which is why it's not something that is linear in the sense that it happened long ago and now we keep getting further and further from it, but rather it happens all the time. And one might even argue that is what is time, but maybe I'm just really pushing that one and that's just a horrible bombshell and we're just gonna drop that. Because in fact, I think what you're saying that you don't understand this question of the truth, I think really what it is you're annoyed with it because, and I don't blame you because it is annoying, that it doesn't seem to be reconciled with being political. Because when one talks about truth in the way we're talking about at the moment, it seems that there can be any number of ways of looking at social agency, and one can be, let's say, right wing, one can be left wing, to circle back to earlier discussions. So, what does that then come down to?
I'm just thinking about.
Do you want to sit down? No.
Okay.
And just what you're saying in terms of encounter and care, and maybe like a thinking towards the future. I'm wondering. I don't know. I can't form coherent sentence, but I'm wondering whether trust is something in this, and it's like this sort of going out from the self, seeking this encounter, but like maybe there's something like in a sort of a human need, or not necessarily human need, to trust, and whether that has any relevance in terms of a sort of reciprocal encounter, and if that has any relevance to trust.
Well, I'd be careful with trust completely. Injured childhood, no, I'm just kidding. But the thing is that immediately brings in a cogito. That is to say, one's thinking about the meeting. This is about the encounter without thinking about it. Okay, so when something is encountered, and this happens, that's the moment of the is. Yes?
I agree, but I think there is an element of trust that I will talk about today. But I can tell you also what I think about that, because it's not a trust about the situation and the expectations that you might have about something, because then you don't enter an encounter if you expect. In my opinion, when you create your body without organs, that involves a kind of trust to someone's face, then the trust is only that, is a trust to the other person's face. And this is your threshold to this encounter in an asymmetrical way, and it is always under a test, and once broken, the parrhesiastic moment breaks as well.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about this seminar. In this seminar, I can use what you're saying, but I'm going to just dial it down.
But you get what I'm saying. It's not about the...
Yes, but
yeah.
I would say, just before you jump in there, I would think everybody in this room, in some respects, trust each other in this room. Whether or not you trust each other outside the room, I don't know. But to say something, you're going to say something, you're going to say what you think. You're not going to be thinking, oh, I wonder if I say it this way, if somebody's going to like hate me later. No, you're going to say it. It's something's happened hopefully something's happened in this kind of seminar. When seminars work, that's why they work. They work because there's a certain kind of playground that happens where there's very loose rules, but people kind of understand them, and there's a quote trust that they're not going to be used against each other. There's going to be allowing this kind of, it's enabling type of thing. Now, that form of trust is palpable, it's real. It's required, otherwise thinking can't take place. You can't just trust your computer. It's the same thing. You can create, or your book, you can have some kind of relationship with it in a certain sense, but unless it's enabling for something to happen, because inanimate objects can enable, but that's why it doesn't require necessarily thinking. You don't come in here thinking, shall I trust everyone in the room or not? It has to happen.
Yes.
It has to come from the encounter. Or it has to come in the encounter. So, and it could be broken, but basically it is established. It doesn't have to be reestablished from ground zero every time we meet. But, so there's a bit of a feedback loop that happens each time. But it could be broken up to, in a certain sense. Now, Anya, what are we going to say?
I was going to bring up one other thing
Okay.
to add to this, because, trust seems really tricky somehow. I was kind of thinking about this sort of black box idea, because we're also talking about algorithmic programming and...
You mean with the virtual reality?
Programming or learning. No, I'm talking about, so it's something like, I don't know much about, and that I was just reading in the Stanislav Lem books about technology, but he talks about how can we develop technology beyond what we know, because that's what we need. There needs to be this expansion of intelligence and information. So, so it can't just be something that is within our capacity to think, just ultimately more complex. It has to be really like a jump. And then he talks about black boxes. So like organisms or situations or organs, like the human brain, for example, where we don't know how it works. We just know whatever goes in it in a certain way, and whatever comes out in a way that has a certain consistency. But how it's done, we don't know. Or he talks about the
It's
kind of
also algorithmic term.
yeah, so
Black
he
box.
talks about in cybernetics, he refers to it in the context of programming. But he also talks about like that sort of thing where he talks about, like, obviously this book is written in the 70s, so he says, well, if you know, we're like behaving like we wanted to jump, but we're engineering every step of the way, like how many steps you have to take and how hard you have to push and stuff. But you just jump, and then once you jump, that proves that it can be done. So this is like, so I'm sort of thinking how we are to ourselves also in some way things that we have to trust.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. You got to the part. So that's exactly right. So that's where Foucault starts to say, don't forget about this thing called the self. Can you just say that part again then? Because you reached it.
So yeah, like we are to ourselves also almost like a black box, I think. So we have to trust that this thing that's speaking right now is gonna be consistent in some way and carry on, you know, not become, like be a self as a position from which a certain kind of agency can.
And he speaks about self-to-self relationship, which is masturbation, by the way. It's not just masturbation, but it is also masturbation, and ought not to be left out of the discussion. Otherwise, we get to the so-called cleaned-up version of self-to-self relation. Because in the sentence, know thyself, it's not just, sit there and think about it. It's the whole process. So this masturbation relation of care of the self so that's why it's really significant what you're saying. And if you go to, I just lost the chapter now. John, were you going to say something? I saw
No.
a move happening.
No, fine.
Okay.
I'm sensing.
Right, it was.
Can I maybe say something?
Yeah, go on.
So it's not maybe not related to what you say, but I was just thinking also about this, like caring for self or caring for, you can say, the human more generally. If we think about the algorithm, and can you build in like trust or can the algorithm? If we take, for example, the idea about the internet or the idea about blockchain, is somehow like the idea is to create an entity or a system, or what we should call an algorithm, that can somehow, you can say, enable trust and care to be
Encoded.
Yeah, exactly. And then we don't know yet what will happen.
But it
with,
can't do that.
Yeah, but it can't exactly, because then somehow there's some, we could call it black boxes, or we could call it some, they someone or some things that somehow become the ports into the thing, or the door we
The
have
hackers.
to go, yeah, the door, yeah, but I'm also thinking about the big companies, for example. They become the door you have to open to go into the system, and then suddenly
Now we're back to platform
it's not free
capitalism.
floating anymore.
Yeah.
So
So now we're back to the dark web then the web becomes taken over by platform capitalism, and then everyone goes to the dark web. And then so the dark web then turns out to be the universe, because, and now we have the Navajo creation myth, because that's basically what that was. It starts with the core in this case being Earth, but maybe the core is actually the web, gets taken over incestuously, broken into the dark web, starts creating much more dark web. See, this is why I like the Navajo creation myth. Okay, they weren't talking about the web, but but I do think there is something to be said about this. The reason we got close, but it's not that truth can be programmed. This is the thing. It's not that the Parisiac can be programmed. There's no programming going on, though it's a self-to-self relation. But the self is not the human self, or it's obviously the human self in this case, especially if we're talking about masturbation. Although I'll tell you, my cat Finn is quite active these days. It's unbelievable. You know, if I weren't there to witness it, it's just incredible. So I'm just saying, I don't know how
There
many
was
people.
also a thing on masturbating algorithm.
And how would that look like?
I have no idea. I was
If
just-
anybody,
I just wrote it down. I just wrote it down.
if anybody could come up with one, it'll be you, Dario. That'll be a chapter of your thesis, masturbating algorithm. Anyway, sorry. I just wanted to just break away from the human for a second, just to remind everybody that honestly, it's impressive how, and this cat is actually been done, you know. So it just, I mean, I got to give the guy a lot of credit because that is energetic every night for hours. It's impressive. I actually talked to the vet about it because I was a little worried. I was kind of like, what's happening to this cat? And the vet said, you know, because he also prefers doing this, you know, near me, next to my arm or even on my arm. And I'm like, and if I pull myself away, he gets very upset. And it's just like, and so the vet said, well, give him a toy. You know, and he doesn't accept the toy. You know, it's just.
You are his toy.
I am his toy. You know, it's like, what? How did this happen? But this is just to mention that non-human beings that are sentient, I'm not saying that you could do this with a goldfish or something, but I mean, maybe goldfish masturbate would be very tough. They must be able to if they have. I'm sorry, I'm thinking, I've gone off. That's right, that's right.
On the glass.
That's right. The Entanglement group comes up with all different ways, different sex toys for different animals. It's like perfect. I mean, actually, green porno is really good. Yeah, Isabel, what's her name? Yeah, Russell Lee with her green porn.
Oh, yeah,
That's very
absolutely.
funny. Okay, what were you gonna say?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Always down with the
Okay,
phone.
if we can turn to, where is it, page, it's nearly 4. Is it nearly 4? Oh, it really is nearly 4. Okay. I just feel like we have to get to Foucault, just, you know, further than page.
One sentence.
Yeah. Wait, I've lost where the page was. Oh yeah, here it is, 157. You can go to 157, partly because I think that it's just on this question of the circle of truth, and what he gets into here is he's speaking about how one understands a relationship of this thing called courage to truth. And so the thing I wanted you to think about as we break up on this is the way in which this thing called truth may or may not ipso facto, I mean Parisian truth, may ipso facto be courage. So he has it depends on how the French is. You don't happen to have the French on you, do you?
It's on your emails. Because Catherine sent it.
No, but the actual title. The title, The Courage of Truth. I don't know in French if it's literally the courage of truth. I'm curious if that's just the English translation.
C'est la courage de la vérité.
What's that?
Oui, it is the courage.
It is the courage of truth.
Of the truth.
Of the truth.
Well, the is always given, so maybe the courage of truth.
Well, the reason I say that because in French, if it's the courage of the truth being Parisian truth, that's different than the courage of truth. And that's why there's a lot of, let's say, well, that's one reason why, at least in English, there's a lot of misapprehension of that.
How is it in French, Catherine? Le courage
De la vérité.
de la vérité.
Now,
La is always.
But you wouldn't
Yeah.
have it without. Exactly.
yeah, but without it could be truth.
But also
or-
the government of the subtext too. Well, let me just-
Yes, and that's where we have lost track of this thing, the governmentality of the truth, of the self, which Finn
Courage
does
de la
not
vérité.
have.
Excusez
Didn't
me.
want to mention that.
It's actually, it is the courage, le courage de la vérité.
En de la vérité.
No, it's le courage de la vérité. So it's the courage of the truth. The de could be a small part of, I mean, you could
So-
take de as a participle and say it's only part of the truth.
And the reason I'm saying this, we're gonna get back to, well, if I read this page. Here, courage names the grain of the platform, not of the field called the Parisiac truth. Because even Parisiac truth doesn't have the courage unless it's enacted, which is not the same thing as being enabled. Now, we're not going to get into Zatesis here because that's on the page 90-ish. But in this, he talks about the importance of Zatesis as the next, not the next part of Parisiac, but as a way of thinking through research or searching that's based on curiosity, that you're driven by curiosity. So Zatesis is a feature of the Parisiac moment. This move of wonderment or curious. Now, I think that that's Foucault's version, to speak back to Anya's point about pain, it's the rift, it's the curious thing, the thing of curiosity is that sort of joyful version, but could lead to pain, it could lead to joy, but it's a way of putting in something that is not ecstatic, so you're not in this kind of sort of abject head or abject positioning, but it's one's curious, and it's the curiosity that forms the feature of this thing called the Parisiac. But I'm just trying to remember. Let's see. Is anybody at that page?
Page 90.
Page 9? No, not Zatesis.
Okay, it's a reference to the thesis.
No, not the, well, you can go to that one, but I want to go to this other page, here we go. Found it finally. Okay, if you turn to page 149, I really want to get to 151, but we'll go to 149 first. And I think that will help us here, maybe not. Who wants to, Dory, you want to read, starting with second?
Second, what will Socratic Parrhesia speak about? It will not speak of competence. It will not speak of technique. It will speak of something else, of the mode of existence, the mode of life. The mode of life appears as essential, fundamental correlative of the practice of truth-telling. Telling the truth in the realm of the care of men is to question their mode of life, to put this mode of life to the test, and define what there is in it that may be ratified and recognized as good, and what, on the other hand, must be rejected and condemned. In this, you can see the organization of fundamental series linking care, Parrhesia free-spokenness, and the ethical division between good and evil in the realm of bias existence. I think we have here the sketch, the already firm outline and way of Socratic Parrhesia, which is not the political Parrhesia I talked about last week. It is well and truly the ethical Parrhesia. It is privileged, essential object is life and the mode of life.
Okay.
Bios means life, not existence.
Yes, it's a bad translation. So, does that help clarify? Because to me, this is what, the reason I'm pointing out this paragraph for you, though I'm sure you. What? Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. It is because here in this paragraph, because you haven't read the whole book, or if you have, you haven't remembered all of it, he delineates between the ethical Parrhesiac and the political Parrhesiac. And what, by the time we get to the end of the book, okay, spoiler alert, you know, so.
No, we didn't have this.
Those who do not want to know at the end of the book,
Do the whole group.
pull your trigger right now.
It's so narrative driven.
Is that the,
The killer is.
oh, it's time to go. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, is that the political Parisiac is the courage of truth. So we've got to get there, because Foucault is nothing else if not political. And he's kind of important. I mean, he goes through this, like, you know, partly around the bush and through the glen, you know, but he's getting at this thing of the political, and the question then circles back to what we're talking about, the technosphere, algorithms, whatever. What is essentially human, or what is essentially life, is political. And so it's kind of backing in to this notion of social agency as opposed to carrying it forward. As opposed to, I'm the social agent in here, we do the following 75 things. It's a backing into it. He calls it the periodistic game. It's not really that you're playing a game, it's that you back into this. And so it's not something that you produce as such, as an object, and therefore it can't be codified in the same way. It has to always have this kind of odd form of existence, in this case, privilege and care. Certain things have to be privileged, care being one of them. You know, and why shouldn't just money be privileged, or why shouldn't, I don't know, you know, bad haircuts, you know, Trump, be privileged? I mean, what is it about, you know, what is it about care that has to work? And here we get to, I'll just kind of end on this, so we get to the problem, the very early problem of Descartes and the questions of meditation, on the meditations, where he very famously says, and I think therefore I am, and we've had that whole long discussion several months ago, that prior to I think therefore I am, for Descartes, is I doubt therefore I think, therefore I am. And it's the doubt that becomes the sine qua non for understanding social agency in a modern world. In a postmodern world, Foucault is saying you have to go to care. I have care, therefore I think, therefore I am. But what gets sort of thrown out is the I. And he goes to Plato for this. I'm not saying you need to just read, you know, like I said, spoiler alert, you need to read the book for this, but he goes to Plato. And the question of how Plato is talking about itself. Now, I'm not saying that Foucault is right or wrong about this. He's talking about the multiversal, or the pluralism of self. That there is no such thing as the individual self except as that being who is the one who gets killed, is the body who dies, is the entity that gets raped. There is a thing called, this thing called the I self, but that I self is always already plural. And that plurality is established when it's fully working through care. But it has to be a pluralized care. Now, personally, like I've mentioned the Daedalon project very often, one of the things that that Martin and Leo have cracked in this thing is figuring out how, through a sea of data, entities get connected that end up forming a position. Sadly, this is already happening with the right wing in terms of the how data coagulates and creates nationalisms, acephalytic nationalisms. And my thinking is, I mean, maybe because I'm at the moment still in my, optimistic phase, if you can produce acephalytic fascism, there must be a way to do that and produce democracies, or produce, environments that are better. So this is why I go to Foucault. I'm not saying that's why you need to go to Foucault. I go to Foucault because in this book in particular, he sets up a pluralized notion of the real, which is more than the Heideggerian move of the is. This real, it is formed on the is, the question of the discourse, but it's established in a way that enables something. And because of this enabling, it has the potential to go into care, but you can't make it go into care any more than you can make it go into nationalism. So the question is, how come at the moment it is going into national? What is it that makes that stick? What is it that makes this other stuff not stick, or the queer thing stick? We fought the good fight for feminism and gay politics in the 70s and 80s, and miraculously it worked. I mean, who knew? And now it's falling apart. And now it's coming back together, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, and I don't mean it's cyclical. The question is, what makes these things stick? Yeah.
Does anybody talk about inertia in this?
Did we, or can we?
Is it, in this discussion you're talking about, or anybody else that you like? Because it seems to me that inertia being both the quality of an object that keeps it in the state that it is, whether it's hurtling forward or sitting still. It seems to me that parisic moment must be the moment where it would break that inertia. Or
Interesting. It's very possible. I mean, you have to pull out the argument, but that makes sense. I mean, there's this other argument that I thought you were going with, but that you weren't, but anyway, which is the Einstein position, which is that he argues that the cosmos is always expanding. But of course, it's not always expanding, because if it was always expanding, it would just expand into infinity, and I don't know, there has to be what he calls some kind of cosmological stasis. And you can't figure out how, which I thought you meant in terms of inertia, but it has to be some kind of stasis that happens, otherwise it's expand. It just, you can't make any sense of it. Sense cannot be made of it, is really what he's saying. And so he puts into his argument on quantum mechanics, that there has to be cosmological stasis, but he can't prove it, and he never was able to prove it. So he just called it his fudge factor, which I do love about Einstein. When he can't come up with something, he just calls it something really simple, like fudge factor. And you are allowed in your theses to have fudge factors. You don't have to prove from beginning to end of how something works. It might just be one of your fudge factors. It just has to be the case. Given what you know, given the way you set it out, that has to work. Like, for example, when we were talking about ways of thinking about artificial intelligence, and I was saying to you, it just can't work in the way you're saying. It's not that I've actually thought it through all the way to the nth algorithmic degree, but it's a fudge factor position. I think, no, it just doesn't seem like that will go. Same thing with, Anya, your position at the moment. We might get to the nub of this, but this whole pain thing, which I'm not quite, I'm with you on it, but I need you to be more analytically clear. So at the moment, it's a fudge factor.
I just think I explained it really badly.
Sorry. But before you go on, were you going to present today, or were you going to present next week?
No, I was gonna present the week after.
Oh, the week after, okay.
Next, yeah.
Okay. Good. More. Yes?
I was just thinking, like, thinking about, like, well, I suppose there's a river has a like non-rigid reference bodies. Sort of, but I was thinking
Where does he say that?
Well, that's the general relativity.
Okay, good. So 1906, 1905.
Yeah. And I was thinking like it's sort of not it's not enough just to sort of like if we shift to sort of thinking about sort of well yeah I was thinking about it's not about the rigidity. Well, the rigidity of networks is about the rattling of the cage, but it's about the interference. But the interference bit, it's not really sort of giving that the primacy, giving your attention to the primacy of the interference. The rattling. Interference.
No pun intended, right?
You're rattling my cage.
This is so great. I mean, what's going to be really funny is people in the outside world watching this and thinking they were lunatics. So, like, Lauren says something about interference, they'll all crack up. It's like, it's fantastic. Want to just try that again?
Oh no.
The joke's been told, the moment's gone. No, but this thing, so think about questions of irritation, interference, these words like risk, but when risk is taken over by, see, what's the difference between the risk of the stockbroker, let's say, the hedge fund manager, and the risk of the Parisic that they're talking about? What's the difference of the risk?
Well, it was quite interesting to relate this to that the arguments in Lasowski's Living Currency, because he's talking
Oh yeah,
about
that's a
this
very important
moment
book, by
of
the way.
exchange.
Can you just repeat the title of that book?
The Living Currency
Yeah.
by Lasowski, and he's talking about I can't remember the term, but it's like yeah, the economy of industrialization, and how the kind of the repetition, the kind of repetition that installs, how that is a sort of shutdown of shutdown of life, kind of. So sort of it's for the repetition of the same rather. Well, he doesn't put it in those terms, but it seems to relate to what we're talking about here, because some of the discussion today was talking about capitalism. Sort of.
Yeah, that's an important book. But I'm not sure how. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about that? Because I wasn't sure. Maybe I lost you there.
Well, I can't. I've just done my notes. I'll bring it next week. So I can't remember it very well. But he's talking about them. He was sort of contrasting the sort of the moment of aggression. We're talking about this moment of risk, and it's bringing in like really the issue of question of perversion versus we're sort of talking about truth here. So the courage in the moment of perversion, so it's a different way in, kind of. I can't say. I think I may be able to say something relevant next week. We'll bring a notes in the
Okay,
week.
but I think getting the perversion word in here is kind of good. I mean, no, it's good.
Always good. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's important because, again, is it just that there's a small but hardy group of people that are like cheerleaders for perversion, or is there something to be said about this thing called perversion? Yes.
There is.
Okay, thank you. But what would be the difference? Like you were saying today that in the tutorial we were having that or even before the tutorial where there are these people that really misread BDSM, and they consider themselves completely perverts and whatever. So how are you what are you saying that makes the perversion that you're talking about different, or that the ones of the kind of things that you were talking about before doesn't qualify as acceptable perversion in a certain sense? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, and this is close to what I was asking Ajamu in the beginning. It's again about how one fabricates their body without organs. One way is to fabricate it through BDSM, for example. But if you do that, if you think that you are doing that actually while reproducing stereotypes, for example, by misunderstanding that the exercise of power is something that has to do with nature, with gender, with skin color, then it's not a fabrication of body without organs. But if you see it only as a way of fabricating and distributing intensities, not alone, but with other people as well, and this includes, for example, many things, as Lyotard says when he's talking about the surface, even canvases to paint, then it's another thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but it's circular yet. It's not yet there.
Okay.
I'll throw in a different, yes, Anya.
Should we make a distinction between a Parisiac figure and a trickster figure?
Okay.
Going back
What
to
figure?
beloved trickster.
Trickster.
Going back to perversion and beloved Navajo
Mm-hmm.
mythology, because there's another figure in this kind of world where we make these things appear as figures, which is the trickster.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the Navajo mythology, for example, it's this figure called, it's Coyote. And then in West Indian context, it's Anansi, it's a spider.
Brother Anansi, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's
shamanistic.
it's a figure that basically constantly, it changes historically the way it bothers things.
Mm-hmm.
So the but it's basically in the most heroic version of it. It's a figure that constantly bothers the borders
Mm-hmm.
of given knowledge and given acceptability through kind of perverse and tricky moves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. So, and it's kind of, in its heroic form, it's like a generative figure that also sometimes makes
Mm-hmm.
rain and weather and kind of, like allows things to come out like that. And then it kind of gets degenerated, usually over, you know.
There's a lot of writing on that by people like Gene Fisher. So
Yeah.
who's and artists like Jimmy Durham, Durham, I think. Durham. Were you at Yamvanite when he came? Did you meet him? Did you meet Jimmy Durham? No.
And then also in most of my Nigerian folklore as well, and the trickster plays a key role. So some artists like Timmy Fanicoli has played around with the trickster. Lyle Ashton Harris has played around with the trickster.
It's very important
yeah,
because I think that I think that that's a very really good point. The only thing I would say is that the trickster isn't the other side of the Parisiac. It is the Parisiac,
But in a different
but
way.
in a very different way. And
Because
what's the
it
different
fucks
way?
with the code, and
Yeah.
by that it reveals
The codes.
the codes, but also where they could go, and it's sort of, its function is, it's going back to the thing that I was saying, or that we were talking about right at the beginning, what closes things down and what opens things up.
Mm-hmm.
Its function is to constantly enlarge and expand the
Mhm.
borders of the cosmos
Mm-hmm.
in some way by
I think
doing that.
with the trickster, I think playing is central, and to trickster because there's
Being playful, yeah,
Yes,
play,
being
yeah.
playful, and that playful I think is also a political kind of play.
Well, you don't get a sense of humor with the Parisiac, do you?
No.
You don't really feel like laugh riot. Okay, yeah.
And following from what Anya said, because it helped me in my thought, in my thinking, maybe what we were discussing about BDSM and perversion has to do with about the degree or how it enables something to be open or closed. For example, if it reproduces stereotypes, then it doesn't create an encounter because a priori it has fixed positions. But if it doesn't reproduce stereotypes, if it creates this kind of playfulness or game, then it creates this space for the encounter to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
the difference, I mean, the sort of, let's say, the postmodern take on that, I don't know if it'd be postmodern or it'd be Breton, I'm trying to think, a take on it that doesn't privilege an entity like a subject, like an outside force coming in, trickster, Parisiac, any of this kind of thing. But that which emerges in the encounter is the trickster. So it's not that there's a trickster who comes in, but that this becomes the entity that emerges. For your ghost, I think, is that maybe I'm wrong about that, but you know, the way in which something emerges in order to move along the environment via, in your case, you're talking about play and the dark room.
Entanglement.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes, yes, but that's a big leap, and we don't want to go there yet. No going there yet. But let's go back to the Parisiac versus the trickster. I think that's a really good, not versus, but and. In the Foucault thing that I was asking you to take a look at, so if you get to if we finally get to the actual page, which is the, let's see, is this it? Yeah, upside here, it's on page, I think it's 156, 157. Now, what he gets into here, the circle of truth and courage, is that he, in this part of his lectures, he starts to get concerned about, let's say, metaphysics and how damaging that can be, the true life, the beautiful life, this kind of thing. He starts talking about the difficulties of this. And he ends up, as you can see, as this thing called life as theater of truth. And I want you to try and get a sense of this. Because I was worried that it was a bit of a leap trying to explain this ethical Parisia and the political Parisia, then the fact that he is banging on about how he doesn't mean the political Parisia, by which it was what Emily was speaking about earlier, the week before, this kind of like just, the WikiLeaks thing, or what, it's not that form of truth-telling, it's not that form of political. But what becomes political is when you get through this whole book, it's life is the political, life, and he calls it, truth is political in as much as it is embodied in this thing called life. Now, life, without trying to sound, like we have to have music coming up and riding off in the sunset, is that this thing called life is going to be taking a position on what is a good life, not just what is life. And that will include perversion, dirt, multiplicity, but it's all contextualized in this thing called the governmentality of the self. So, do we have enough time to get into that? It's 4:30. I think not. I don't know. Can we start next session with this? Is that okay? We start with this chapter. I'll sit it around everybody so no one has a nervous breakdown.
So we reached 9 for the next session.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you might want to read in between that, for all you people that don't like to jump around, that want to read totally through. I can understand that. But should you be okay about spoiler alerts and things like that, you can go to chapter 9 first. and read back and read forward into it, because it's in this chapter, this first hour and the second hour actually, where you'll begin to see how he puts a lot of meat on the bones, as it were, a lot of intensity in this. And I think that if we questioned it in terms of this thing called The Trickster, is there something that you would recommend to read?
I have to, it's something that I researched a really long time ago.
Okay.
So.
I know there's a big book that came out in the 90s called The Trickster.
Yeah.
Okay. Subtle title. We'll
Yeah,
find it.
Yeah, it came out. There's a book that came out around the mid-90s called The Trickster.
Was it by Gene Fisher?
Should we read the living currency one? 'Cause
But we
it's
could.
actually-
The currency, I just found it, it's in the reading room.
Yeah, it's in the reading room, yeah. It's a
But
great.
that's not the good translation, I think. That's.
Oh, did we not get a good translation?
Have you got the latest one?
No.
Daniel Smith.
Oh, can you send it to us?
I haven't got it digitally.
Oh, can't be that difficult.
No, I can photo. I haven't got a scanner, but I can photograph it and then.
That would be ridiculous. This- How long is it?
Well, it's not too.
Daniel Smith
Yeah.
translation of,
I
what's it
can bring
called?
it in next week. Maybe I can get the scanner here or something.
What's it called?
It's Daniel W. It's
The-
Daniel W. Smith.
The
translation.
currency of what?
The living currency.
Oh, that's it.
Daniel Smith translation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, if
you
you do
can.
Amazon, it would just come up as the latest one.
No, because I'll.
Because it's all like this, like the version aspect is key.
So are you sure we don't have the right one?
I think you have the Jordan Levinson one, don't you, or something? That's the one we read, and this one's a much better translation.
Okay.
And it's like got the, it's got another piece in it as well. Like, on this comparison between Saab and Furrier.
Okay, now let's just get that PDF, so we can find it. Anyway, okay. Oh, here it is.
I need to get my scanner and I can scan
Oh, no,
this.
no, no, boo. We'll, I mean, we'll find this book. But even the bad translation, okay, it is bad. But
It's so much better, this other translation, Rick.
She makes it worse.
So, it deserves to be read properly. It's like really amazing.
Anyway, so let's just find a trickster, see if there's a trickster on there. Is there any interesting film to watch? You know what's a very good film for the trickster is Black Orpheus.
Does it have a religious sex?
Oh, the film set in Brazil.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a fantastic film.
yes.
Black Orpheus.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's fantastic. It's carnivalesque.
Also, you might want to look. I think it's something like the Juba character in Trinidad in Carnival, and they paint themselves blue as well. Something that might be something that's
Can you
linked to
send that around if you
the
find it?
trickster
Yeah, please.
as well.
No 70s hippie movies, please.
What? What was this? What was that?
No 70s hippie movies, please.
Okay, this is like 60s.
Yeah.
No Wickerman style, please.
Carmen is a great film. Unbelievable. Anyway, I think you'll find Black Orpheus very creepy and kind of a sleepless night moment. I hope so anyway, otherwise, honestly. Yeah, okay, so we got you're not all gonna read all of this, so some of you can read. In fact, Lauren, since you have read that, can you talk a little bit about it next week?
Yeah, I'd quite like to talk about that.
Okay, great, so
I
you'll,
need some help with it, so.
okay, so you and Adam can discuss.
Bad translation.
Because when he has to read the bad translation, you can help him through that. Okay, but you guys can work together, and then, who wants to do chapter 9? Who's burning to do chapter 9, really can't wait to do chapter 9. Anna, fantastic, okay, good. And Dario, why not? Okay, so that's enough. And then
Oh, but I won't be here next week.
oh, that's
I'm
clever.
teaching. No, I'm going to Liverpool.
Okay,
For teaching exchange.
that's all right, that's all right. Anya, can you do it?
No.
You're not gonna be here either.
No,
Or
I'm
you are
gonna
gonna
be
be here.
here, but I'm just like, there's no way I can do that.
Okay. How about if you watch Black Orpheus?
Take till next week. I really can't do anything. I have too much
Okay.
other stuff on.
Despina, you wanna watch Black Orpheus?
Okay. Okay, I'll do it.
And would you do chapter 9, Shannon?
For my life, I will not be able to do that for you.
Are you leaving earlier?
I'm leaving on Tuesday.
Is it a nice film, Black Orpheus, or I will get frustrated?
I'm sure you get.
How shall we
Sorry,
know?
Dalton's gonna-
Emily, would you do chapter 9?
I can give it a go.
Great.
Good.